Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly wild. A story that exists in that chilling space where grounded true crime literally collides head-on with something completely unexplainable. Imagine a massive mystery wrapped up in a terrifying paranormal event, playing out while hurtling down the train tracks in the dead of night. It's seriously chilling.
Some truths are meant to stay in the dark. That's a quote from Arthur Pendleton, and he's the main guy in our story today. Now, Arthur wasn't some paranormal investigator hunting ghosts. Far from it. He was a hard-boiled, mid-tier investigative journalist working out of Chicago. A guy who believed in strict deadlines, a good glass of scotch, and, well, the power of a well-placed bribe. He definitely didn't believe in the supernatural. But what he ended up experiencing, it permanently changed how he saw the world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Set the scene. It's November 14th, 1974. Picture this freezing, unrelenting rain just completely blurring the neon lights outside Chicago's Union Station. The whole country is basically reeling from Nixon's resignation, steeped in paranoia. And Arthur? He's sitting in the concourse nursing a lukewarm coffee and probably wishing it was a double scotch. His editor just handed him this total fluff piece on American Railroad lore, specifically some local legend about a phantom haunting the 11:59 p.m. Midnight Express to Los Angeles. So, armed with a leather satchel and honestly enough cynicism to fill a whole rail car, Arthur boards this hulking silver sleeper train, totally expecting a boring ride. To escape the stale smell of Pall Malls and cheap cologne in his cabin, Arthur wanders down to the dimly lit bar car. And this is where the stakes completely change and ground themselves in reality. He meets a woman named Evelyn Hayes. And Evelyn isn't there for folklore or ghost stories. She's there because exactly 1 year ago, her brother Thomas boarded this exact same train. The timeline shows Thomas made a really frantic payphone call to her right before getting on in Chicago. But when the train finally rolled into Denver, Thomas was just gone. His cabin was completely locked from the inside. Now you might be thinking, what did the police say? Well, they ruled his disappearance a suicide, basically assuming he jumped between the cars. But when you look closer, that narrative totally falls apart. Evelyn points out some massive, glaring anomalies. First off, Thomas was absolutely terrified of heights. Second, he was getting married in just a month. And maybe the weirdest part, why would a guy intending to jump leave his wallet and his luggage neatly packed inside a locked room? I mean, the pieces just do not fit. So what really happened? The real reason Thomas vanished is hidden in that frantic final phone call. You see, he was an auditor for a massive real estate firm, and he told Evelyn he'd stumbled onto something buried in his company's basement. Decades-old financial records from 1924 tied directly to a Prohibition-era mobster named Silas Vance. Even crazier, Thomas told his sister he was being followed by a guy wearing a crushed velvet suit. Literally, a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a history book. Right as Evelyn reveals this massive clue to Arthur in the bar car, things get weird. The physical environment around them actually begins to warp. Imagine you're sitting there with them. Suddenly, the train violently lurches. The overhead lights start buzzing like an angry hornet, and then pop, total darkness. Then, these eerie amber emergency lights click on, throwing these long, creepy shadows against the mahogany walls. And it gets cold. Like dropping temperatures so fast, Arthur can literally see his own breath misting in the air. Out of nowhere, a heavy metal door swings open, and this old conductor named Elias steps through holding a brass lantern. Arthur grabs the guy's sleeve, asking if this power outage happens a lot on the anniversary of the so-called murder. Elias just freezes. He looks absolutely terrified, leans in and delivers this bone-chilling warning. He says, "If you hear a whistle that doesn't belong to this train, lock your cabin door." And then, he just vanishes into the next car, leaving Arthur and Evelyn sitting there in the freezing dark.
No way, right?
But Evelyn is determined to find out what happened to her brother, so they walk toward the back of the train. Now, the conductor explicitly said there were only 12 cars, but they hit this tarnished silver plaque that clearly reads 13. As they pull open the heavy iron door, they essentially step 50 years back in time. And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. The cheap 1974 vinyl and that deafening diesel roar, instantly gone. Suddenly, they're standing in a 1924 luxury sleeper car, completely lined with velvet drapes. It smells heavily of copper and cigar smoke, and the air pressure shifts to this super weird, silent, underwater kind of hum. I want you to really picture this scene. Arthur and Evelyn are standing in this impossible time-displaced hallway. And way down at the far end of this velvet-draped corridor, there's a figure. His back is turned,
He's wearing a dark, crushed velvet suit and a charcoal fedora. It's the exact same man Evelyn's brother said was following him. So who is this guy? Arthur, trying to act tough but failing to hide his shaking hands, shouts down the corridor, and very, very slowly, the figure turns around.
The reveal is straight up horrific. Under the flickering gas-style sconces, they finally see his face. His skin is this pale, translucent white, and where his eyes should be, just hollow voids of absolute darkness. Plus, there's a jagged, terrible scar running straight across his throat, dripping fresh, gleaming crimson onto his white collar. It's Silas Vance, the mobster from 1924, and he just starts gliding soundlessly toward them over the patterned carpet.
But here's the crazy part. Vance doesn't attack them. Instead, he raises a skeletal finger, pointing right past them to a luggage compartment. Then, the Phantom opens his mouth, but it's not a human voice that comes out. It's the piercing, absolutely deafening shriek of an old steam engine whistle erupting straight from his scarred throat. Suddenly, the lights flash blindingly bright, and the whole corridor fills with the ghostly, shadowy silhouettes of men wearing 1920s suits.
Arthur and Evelyn are completely frozen, forced to watch this residual haunting. It's playing out in front of them like an old projector film. They watch as the shadow of Silas Vance gets ambushed by two men. One slashes his throat, which perfectly mirrors the horrific injury on the ghost. The other guy grabs this thick, leather-bound ledger and shoves it into a hidden compartment right beneath the floorboards of Cabin B. So the Phantom wasn't trying to scare them at all. He was literally showing them exactly how he died, and crucially, where the actual evidence was stashed. So the crucial point is this number right here, 50. As soon as the vision ends, that oppressive, heavy atmosphere just snaps. The familiar roar of the modern diesel engine comes flooding back. Car 13 instantly reversed to what it really is in 1974, a dusty, abandoned baggage car. But Evelyn doesn't miss a beat. She drops straight to her knees exactly where Cabin B had been in the vision. Together, she and Arthur use a pocket knife to pry up the rusted floorboards, and they find it. Evidence that had been sitting there totally untouched in the dark for exactly 50 years. And what they uncover perfectly bridges the gap between 1924 and 1974. First, they pull out that heavy, leather-bound ledger they saw in the ghostly vision. It is a meticulous, page-by-page record of blackmail, extortion, and offshore accounts, all tied to the Vance crime syndicate. And resting directly on top of that ledger, a gold wristwatch. Evelyn immediately breaks down in tears because it's the exact watch she gave her brother Thomas for his graduation. I mean, the physical proof right there is completely undeniable. Let's move to how this builds the real-world case, because with this evidence, the tragic reality of Thomas's death suddenly makes horrific sense. Step 1. The descendants of the men who betrayed Silas Vance back in the 20s, they were now running the exact real estate firm Thomas was auditing. When they realized he'd found the hidden ledger, they tracked him onto the Midnight Express. Step 2. They murdered him in his cabin to protect their massive corporate empire. And Step 3. They locked the door from the inside to make it look like a suicide and threw his body from the moving train. It hits Arthur like a ton of bricks, this profound, honestly chilling realization. Silas Vance's ghost hadn't haunted Thomas to hurt him. The Phantom had literally been trying to point him to the truth. The true horror aboard the Midnight Express wasn't some translucent spirit with a slashed throat. Not at all. It was the grounded, violent greed of living, breathing men who were willing to murder an innocent guy just to protect their dirty wealth. So the sun finally rises, the train pulls into Denver, and Arthur and Evelyn walk straight to the police with the ledger and the watch. The aftermath is insanely swift. Within 48 hours, the FBI raids that Chicago real estate firm. The CEO and his associates are slapped in cuffs, arrested for Thomas's murder and literally decades of hidden financial crimes. Arthur ends up writing this masterpiece cover story that wins him massive awards and a huge promotion. But he deliberately leaves out the freezing temperatures, Car 13, and the ghost of Silas Vance. He knows the public is only ready for the grounded, rational truth. Arthur's whole experience really proves something. While some truths absolutely belong on the front page, others, the completely impossible things that happen in the forgotten, dark corners of a hurtling train, well, maybe those are just meant to stay in the dark. It definitely leaves us with a lingering thought to carry with us. The next time you find yourself traveling in the dead of night, listening to that rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels, will you make sure your cabin door is locked? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, stay curious.